Hello and welcome to our very first webcast of Value Added in Ukraine. My name is Wieland Haselauer. I'm the founder of Value Added in Ukraine, and I do have more than 15 years of experience in the field of international taxation. Among them, many years with Big Four companies, and I'm working in the field of expatriate services too. So I may claim that I have quite some understanding about the issue of people working in a foreign country. Let me give you an introduction to Value Added in Ukraine. It's a venture aiming to bring together Ukrainian and European Union-based business players. Not only are we building a bridge and a network, providing a platform for business contacts to cooperate, we also try to give potential European Union business partners an insight of what they may expect from Ukrainian partners in terms of quality, excellence, and competence. That's a personal concern of mine, because in my personal experience, many people in Central Europe have wrong ideas of what life and business is like in Ukraine, what quality you can expect from that country. Now, even more in the middle of this horrible war, Russia is leading against this peaceful, modern, and open-minded country. So I assume that many of these beliefs still root from Soviet times, and there is a widely spread perception of Eastern European countries as retrograde or technologically outdated, or just second class in many people's mind. And this is simply not the case. So that's my personal task too. Take Ukraine's IT industry. To be honest, it's ahead of most European Union countries. So this is a fact, and we will get back to this issue separately, but what I like to say, reality tells another story. Ukraine is a modern, liberal, and impressive country that keeps up with Central Europe easily. And building these bridges and providing insight for a new mindset, that's part of our mission. Let me get back to the issue of our webcast, the international taxation principles for people working remote, which is especially tailored for Ukrainian people working remote. The idea of this broadcast is to give you some guidance about basic international taxation principles. So many people were forced to leave their homes for known reasons, and there are more than 5 million Ukrainians are spread all over the world now, trying to build their lives. And many of these people are still working remote. So just to make this clear, we're dealing with a huge amount of highly skilled professionals. Let me give you an example. As it turns out, approximately 45% of people coming from Ukraine to Germany between 25 and 59 years old do have a university degree. 45% compared to 27% of German total population within this age range. So, but I'm digressing. Many Ukrainians are still working for Ukrainian companies or companies resident in another country. And this situation involves some complicated and crucial questions about taxation. Basic question is, where do I have to pay my taxes, and where do I have to file a tax return? By the way, we are planning to publish this webinar in Ukrainian language too, with a voiceover, because my Ukrainian is not good enough for this, and we'll keep you updated and hope it's available as soon as possible. So today we're going to explain some basic principles about international taxation. It's quite a complicated issue and not very popular, not really something to spend a nice evening with. But in my professional experience, many people are not even aware that they are subject to taxation in another country. And I think it's worth taking a little effort and just being prepared. Because if you realize it at a later point, it might be very complicated to repair. So as a starting point, we will start with national tax law, because it's always the starting point in international taxation. We will get to the question of unlimited and limited taxation, and the question of residence, which usually provides the basis for this. We will give you some information about different systems of income taxation and go to compliance issues, which basically involves the question, do I have to file a tax return or not? After that, we'll give you an idea about double tax treaties, which actually prevent you from double taxation, and focus on employment income. We're also planning to do a webcast on business income, but as this would be just too many information, for now we will focus on employment income. Finally, we'll get to some social security questions, because this is also very relevant for employment income issues. So this is basically our program. So let's get started. If you live in another country, basically your starting point would be a national tax law. If you like to know whether you're taxable or not in that country, or more specific, where you actually have to pay your taxes, you have to start with national tax law. Most countries, including Ukraine, Germany, Austria, and many more, follow an unlimited taxation approach. Panama does not, for example, but it's not the norm. So in America, Europe, you would find this unlimited taxation approach as the usual approach. That means if you're subject to unlimited taxation, you're subject to taxation on your worldwide income, no matter where it originates from, including Ukrainian salaries, Chinese dividends, everything you earn worldwide. That's a simple basic principle. So if you're subject to unlimited taxation, that country wants to tax it all, no matter where it comes from. If you're subject to limited taxation, a country will usually only tax your income sourcing from there. So simple example, you're an opera singer, you have a concert in Austria. Austria wants to tax your fee for that concert, but not all your income, because you're just there one day for a concert. So this would be limited taxation. So now we need to determine whether you're subject to unlimited taxation or not. As a bottom line, there needs to be some kind of nexus between the taxpayer and the country. Mostly this nexus, this connection, is determined either by residence or by the so-called abode, which is more or less the time you spend somewhere, the time you stay in the country. So it's either a place to live or it's either just being there. I'll give you an example about the Austrian rule. According to Austrian tax law, you are subject to unlimited taxation if you are a resident. And the resident is someone who has a residence available or who has the habitual abode in Austria. By the way, the German rule is pretty much the same. So what does it mean? First, the residence is quite simple. Well, you might think. There are crazy cases, but basically, yes, it's a place to live that is available to you. It doesn't matter if it's big or small, if it's rented or property, or if it's just made available by someone. It's simply an apartment, house, a room that you can use to live and that you intend to keep. Even a hotel room can be deemed to be a residence for income tax purpose, but that's quite a specific case and only under certain circumstances. To make it simple, if you have moved from Ukraine to Austria, for example, and you have an apartment available or a house, irrespective of the legal basis or whether you have to pay for it or not, this will typically be considered a residence for tax purpose, and therefore you shall be subject to unlimited taxation in Austria. Austria wants to tax your worldwide income. The other point, the abode, is a second way of establishing unlimited taxation in case there is no residence available. According to the Austrian tax authorities' approach, that's basically the place where you stay. And there is an easy rule. In case your stay exceeds 183 days, it's assumed you have your abode in Austria. So let's say you are staying in different hotel rooms, then this nexus we were talking about, it's just established by exceeding a certain time you stay in the country, which would be 183 days. However, it doesn't mean that it's not the case if you stay below 183 days, but if you do, you certainly are subject to unlimited taxation. There are many complicated cases, and especially today when people have various answers to life models that have replaced the traditional approach of just staying where you are all your life. This doesn't make it easier. But mostly for our purpose, it will be simple. If you have a home available, you are deemed to be a resident and you are subject to unlimited taxation, including Ukrainian sourced income. So now let's move to the Ukrainian rule. I'll read it out. Residents are individuals who have their place of abode in Ukraine. So that's simple. If you have a place to stay, you're subject to unlimited taxation. When an individual has a place of abode in another country as well, such an individual is deemed to be a resident of Ukraine if they have a permanent place of abode in Ukraine, a domicile. What does it mean? Basically, it means if you have two places to stay, like you have moved to Austria, you have a home available, and you still have your Ukrainian home available. So, according to this rule, you will still be subject to unlimited taxation in Ukraine. Even if you don't use it right now, you remain subject to unlimited taxation. So the next good question is, if you are subject to taxation, how will your income be taxed? And this is always a question of national tax law again. Each country will tax you according to their own standards, with their own tax rates, using their very own rules to determine the taxable basis, allowing different deductions, and so on. It's not a very satisfying situation, of course, because you really need to deal with these rules. And income tax rates, they vary significantly. I'll give you an example. In Ukraine, personal income tax is levied at a rate of 18%. It's a flat tax. It's always 18%. In Austria, and for example in Germany too, income tax is levied at a progressive rate, starting from 20% going up to 50%, and even 55% if your income exceeds 1 million euros. It's not always easy to calculate the actual tax burden. You cannot simply estimate it, you need to calculate it based on the monthly gross salary. But of course, there are calculation tools for this, so let me give you a quick example. In our example, a person earns 50,000 euros per year gross salary. In that case, in Ukraine, you pay 9,000 euros of income tax per year. That's exactly 18%. In Austria, your income tax will amount to approximately 5,700 euros. So wow, that's less than in Ukraine, right? Yes, but it's only half of the story, because in Austria, salaries are also subject to social security contributions. So there is another burden of nearly 9,000 euros. If you consider both income tax and social security, the total amounts to 14,684 euros in our case. So that would be about 29%. It's just a simplified example to show the effects of different income tax systems. There are many things to consider: allowances, tax deductions, special expenses. For example, in Austria, you will typically receive 14 salaries per year. And number 13, the holiday bonus, and number 14, Christmas bonus, will be taxed at the flat rate of 6% mostly. I'd like to point out the actual tax rate may not reflect your actual tax burden at the end of the day. And there might be many things to consider when you file a tax return. So you can see the tax burden is very different according to the actual income. And it's important to consider social security contributions, which are a significant part of your total tax and duty burden. We'll get back to this issue in the end, and social security is regulated separately from taxes, because that wouldn't be complicated enough only like this. Apart from the question where you have to pay your taxes, compliance is another thing to consider. because irrespective of the fact that the country might not actually tax your income, you might still be obliged to file a tax return. In Ukraine, it's even a constitutional duty to declare income received from sources outside Ukraine. So if you're interested, you can read about it. It's Article 14, Paragraph 14, Subparagraph 55 of the Constitution of Ukraine. So you might have to file 2 tax returns, one in each country, in different languages. Still doesn't mean that you actually have to pay taxes, because a double tax treaty might prevent you from it. But you have to file a tax return. So now let's get back to the double tax treaty. Let's assume you have a home available in Ukraine. You're lucky it's still fine and you have moved to Austria. Ukraine will still consider you a resident for tax purpose. You have moved to Austria or any other country with the corresponding rule, and you have a home available there. Then you're subject to taxation with your worldwide income in 2 countries, in Austria and Ukraine in that case. Both countries want to tax you, Austria and Ukraine, for example, both according to their own standards with their own tax rates, using their very own rules to determine the taxable basis, allowing different deductions and so on. So in order to avoid double taxation, there are double tax agreements in place, double tax treaties. These are bilateral contracts between 2 individual countries. It's not EU law, it's always something between 2 actual countries. And although most of them are based on the so-called OECD Model Convention, they are all different in detail and shall be checked individually before. These double tax treaties work by allocation norms. Depending on the particular kind of income, each double tax treaty sets a rule which country may tax what kind of income and restrict the other country's taxation right. For example, one of these rules allows Ukraine to tax Ukrainian-sourced dividends of a resident of Austria, and the other way around. Just a simple example. So before we deal with these allocation norms, we need to talk about the term a resident of a country for the purpose of the tax treaty. It's important to distinguish it from residence status according to national tax law. We have been talking about this before. It determines whether you're subject to unlimited taxation or not. But it's only a question of national tax law. Each country has its own rules. The residence status of the double tax treaty will determine which country has the right to tax your income. As said before, most double tax treaties are based on a model convention issued by the OECD. The Model Tax Convention on Income and Capital, it's called. And there is one article, Article 4 of this model convention, which sets a basic rule. It says, a person shall be deemed to be a resident only of the state in which he or she has a permanent home available. So if you only have a home available in Austria, you are deemed to be a resident of Austria for the purpose of the tax treaty. In case someone who has no home available in Ukraine, it's quite easy. Citizenship is not important, it's just about a permanent home available. In case of a permanent home available in both countries, there is a tiebreaker rule. In that case, the center of vital interests is crucial. That's the place the personal and economic relations are closer. You can have many homes available, but only one center of your vital interests. Well, you can, but not for tax purpose. So they needed to define something. So good question. How would you determine the country of your personal relations are closer? If you were forced to leave your home, well, for God's sake, in most cases, it's quite easy. It's the place of your family residence, where the people live you're closest to, your personal relations. So again, that's a lot of information. Let's assume a quite common case. You were moving with your family from Ukraine to Austria. You have a home available in both countries, then you shall be deemed to be a resident of Austria for the purpose of the tax treaty, because it is where your family stays right now. Actual situations might even be more difficult. Say your spouse is working for the army in Ukraine, but you have moved abroad with your children. In that case, your residence will still be Austria, as you live there with your children, which is typically considered a stronger nexus for tax purpose. If you have no children, it gets even more complicated, or if you're a digital nomad. So today there are various different colorful life models, and this question is not so easy to answer sometimes. It's always a question of facts and circumstances. As life is not black or white, there are many shades of gray, though it's a crucial question for the determination of the taxation right. And even tax authorities may argue about it, which might be nasty, but there are instruments for such cases. So yes, there are many complicated situations. So let's summarize. National tax law, check the national rules if you are subject to unlimited taxation or not, mostly depending on the home available or your physical stay. Double tax treaty, your country of residence is the state where you have a home available. In case you have two, it's the state where your center of vital interests is located, typically your family residence. So finally, after we have discussed the basics, we can get to the actual allocation norm, which sets the taxation rights. I hope I could explain it in a way that is understandable. I know it's quite complicated, but it's some basics you need to understand the allocation norm itself. So the double tax treaty will define allocation norms for each type of income. So basically it says in case of a dividend, country A or country B has the right to tax. In case of interest income, in case of income from immovable property, etc., etc. We will focus on income from employment right now, so on salaries. And as an example, I would like to take the double tax treaty between Austria and Ukraine, which is Article 15. Article 15 sets a quite simple rule. It says that basically your country of residence has the right to tax your employment income. So simple example, you're a resident of Austria, you have a salary from an Austrian company, then Austria has the sole right to tax your income. Ukraine has no right to tax your income. Although according to national law, Ukraine would tax your income, unlimited tax approach, remember? But double tax treaty overrules national tax law and takes away their taxation claim. There is an exemption to this rule, of course, another exemption. If work is physically performed in the other country has the right to tax this income. I think we will need an example too. Let's stick with the first example. Someone is a resident of Austria and has an Austrian salary. So Austria has the sole right to tax this income as a country of residence. Now this person is working in Ukraine too. Let's say for a week during a holiday, remote in the home office. In that case, according to the rule of Article 15, Ukraine has the right to tax income, but only income related to work actually physically performed there. So what you would need to do is you would need to split your income, and you would need to determine which part of your salary is related to this 1 week of work. So that's the basic rule of paragraph 1. Your country of residence has the right to tax your employment income. Only if you really work in the other country, then the other country has a limited right to tax income related to work physically performed there. So this rule would be quite a crazy effort sometimes, because for example, if you go to Ukraine for a week, you would need to split your salary and you would need to tax your income relating to 1 week of work and tax it in Ukraine. And for this purpose, there is another exemption, which is called the 183-day rule. It's set in paragraph 2 of Article 15. And basically, it just limits the other country's taxation right in case your stay does not exceed 183 days there. There are two other things. First, the salary may not be paid by a company which is resident of the other country, and the employer may not have a permanent establishment there. I'll try to explain it with an example. So let's stick to our first example. A person is resident in Austria, working for an Austrian company, and now works in Ukraine for a week. In that case, according to the 183-day rule, Ukraine doesn't have a taxation right because her stay does not exceed 183 days. What you need to consider, because this is different in different double tax treaties, is the relating period. Here we have a 12-month period. So it's 183 days in any 12-month period. There are double tax treaties referring to calendar year. There are double tax treaties referring to tax year. So this might be different, and you should have a look at it in detail. Plus, what you need to consider is your employer. He may not be resident in the other country. So if it's an Austrian employer, it's no problem. But if it's a Ukrainian employer, you would actually really have to split your income the first day you're working there. So this might mean a lot of effort, but the 183-day rule is intended to provide some exemptions for people who are really working somewhere just for a short period, because it would simply be a huge administrative effort to split your income just because you work there for some days. What I shall mention too is that tax authorities have the possibility to not to apply this rule. Sometimes they do. For example, there is the so-called economic employer approach, which is used in case of secondments, like company A seconds you to company B. And in that case, they wouldn't consider the legal employer as the employer, but the company you're working for, and call them the economic employer. So this is one point which is worth mentioning. Another point is the establishment of a permanent establishment, because even if you work remote, there are some discussions if you could establish a permanent establishment for your employer. But these discussions, I think this would be too much detail. It's just something I would like to mention, that the 183-day rule, it does not always apply, and sometimes there are a lot of discussions even between tax authorities because the situation is not clear. But as a basic rule, if you work in another country, you stay there under 183 days, and you have no employer there, or the employer has no permanent establishment there, then you shouldn't be taxable. That's the basic rule. So finally, a good question is, how would double taxation be eliminated in the end? Because we have the allocation norm. The allocation norm tells you which country has the right to tax your income. Together with this allocation norm, there is always a norm about a method to avoid double taxation. And in our example, the double tax treaty between Austria and Ukraine, it's quite easy. It's the exemption method, which means if Austria has the right to tax your employment income, in that case, Ukraine will exempt your income from taxation. There is another method, which is the credit method, which is used in many double tax treaties with American countries. And it doesn't exempt your income, but your taxes paid in the other country will be credited against your tax due. So in that case, it's much easier. The other country will always just exempt your income and not tax it. Finally, we come to an end, and we should have a quick focus on Social Security, because as far as Social Security is concerned, it's not covered by double tax treaties. So there are special agreements about Social Security in place, but these are not too many. And if there is none, like it's the case between Germany and Ukraine or Austria and Ukraine, just the national rules apply. So there is nothing that prevents you technically from double taxation about Social Security, because they are simply not covered by double tax treaties. So what you need to do is you need to have a look at the local rules of your country of residence and determine whether you're subject to Social Security contributions or not. And this could easily be the case. So it's another subject, it's quite complicated, and you are not protected by double tax treaties. That's just something I wanted to mention, because for many people it's quite strange that it's a completely different issue and not covered in double tax treaties. So thank you very much for your attention. We hope we could give you a bit of an overview about international taxation principles and perhaps answer some of your questions. If you have any remarks or specific questions, you are invited to get in contact, let us know, and we will try to answer all your questions. So stay connected, stay tuned, and thank you very much. Goodbye.